I am here at Greenwood Cemetery. It is one of the oldest cemeteries in the United States that is and was open to everyone. It was one of the first of three cemeteries that you didn't have to be specific nomination to be buried in. You could be Catholic, Jew, Chinese, from anywhere in the world buried here. Prior to that, you had to be buried in a family plot, or you had to be buried inside of a church graveyard, right? The place is massive. It is in the heart of Brooklyn. It's again Greenwood Cemetery. And this real estate here is just, one, it's expansive, but it's also in the heart of Brooklyn. Oh, you can only imagine how much this is worth in today's dollars. But it's a really historic cemetery because a lot of famous people are buried here, and notorious people, and victims of great tragedies. So, to start with, the infamous Butcher Bill is buried here. He was the mob boss in the 1850s who controlled the notorious 5 Points in Manhattan, which was just an absolute den of debauchery, murder, drugs, theft, and just a real hellhole. They actually destroyed the 5 Points because it was so notorious. They turned it into a single road over through there. They took out the 5 roads and put in a government building. But he's buried here. One of the people he dealt with, Boss Tweed, Tammany Hall, the most notorious corrupt politician in U.S. history, is buried here. Boss Tweed and his whole family. In today's dollars, you know, they were billionaires off of the corruption that they had going through Tammany Hall here in Brooklyn, right? They controlled everything. And right behind me here, you can see a little bit, but we're going to go up and take a look at it, is the Pierpont family grave site. Pierpont family was incredibly wealthy. In Cobble Hill, which is just a couple miles here, they have an entire street called Pierpont Street. There is a family residence that was there that takes up the entire block. It went up for sale about 8 years ago. It listed with over 60 bathrooms, 48 rooms, and was selling for like $180 million at the time. And the interior was spectacular. Like frescoes on every ceiling, hand carved. Everything was hand carved, every room. Just unbelievable. So, this is the Pierpont family mausoleum. Henry Pierpont is one of the founders, or the founder, of Greenwood Cemetery. Now, so we're going to see, like today, this is a Gothic revival style architecture. Now, generally, when I have come up in here in the past, there's always candle wax, bottles, liquor, people doing witchcraft up here. So, you know, we'll see. Not exactly the kind of people I'd be trying to raise up if I was into actually doing those kind of things. You know, these people weren't exactly the nicest people, right? They made their money off the backs of all the immigrants in this country who were basically slave labor with no child labor laws. You know, just the nastiest kind of people you'll probably ever want to deal with. But so their entire family is buried up here, and I believe J.P. Morgan was married to Henry's daughter. J.P. Morgan isn't buried here. He is buried, believe, in Massachusetts. You can see they have some pretty crazy tombs. mean, it is beautiful. It is a beautiful Gothic revival style mausoleum. Of course, built probably in one of the best spots in the park, right at the top of a hill. You can oversee the park, the cemetery. Shocker, there's no wax or liquor up in here for a change. Never seen anybody doing witchcraft, but I don't know. Like I said, that's just not for me. These people were despicable, right? Made their money off the backs of the suffering masses, you know. And then, of course, J.P. Morgan, notorious for, among other things, blowing up the stock market, causing the stock market 30s, right? Owner of the Titanic and the Olympia. And he got off the Titanic right before it sank. The stop before. So, And all of his rivals, him and all his friends got off the Titanic before it sank. And all of his rivals, like the owner of Macy's, the founder of Macy's department store, I think that was William Levi, and John Jacob Astor, they all perished on the Titanic. The outcome with that was the creation of the unbacked dollar, right? You had the creation of the Federal Reserve, where the government was no longer the private. The government was no longer the controller of the monetary system. It was handed over to these people, the Morgans, the Pierponts, and which is why we have a debt of over 30, I think it's 30 trillion now. I just even stopped looking because it's just completely ridiculous. But prior to that, it was gold backed. And, these people had a hand in that. And of course, they came in after the stock market collapsed and they bought up everything for pennies on the dollar. So they made out like bandits, right? Just total scumbags. But got a beautiful burial plot, unlike all the people that they sacrificed who probably laying in a mass grave somewhere. They don't have any, they don't have a beautiful headstone or mausoleum or a casket, right? So that's just a little bit of the history of these people. And, it's just an incredible time. Talking about the Gilded Age, the kind of money these people had was like hard to even define by today's dollars, because the $1 was just like probably, it could be like a week or a couple weeks worth of pay for the average person, right? It's like, so you can't even compare it. To go to Harvard cost 1 year's wage back then. To buy a house cost 1 year's wage. Okay, and the average person could send their child to Harvard. The average person working a medium income wage could buy a home, right? Like, completely different now. The dollar's so devalued, it's worth nothing. So these people had a kind of wealth that we just can't even comprehend. It was just incredible. So some other notables that are buried here. The victims of the Triangle Fire, which was probably owned by people like this, the Pierponts. Poor immigrants, probably Irish Catholic women who were seamstresses. They worked in a big building and in Manhattan, and during the working hours they were locked in there, so nobody could just leave, right? Like you were like borderline slavery, forced labor. You're working 16-hour days in the worst conditions. Building caught fire. The doors were locked and nobody could get out. So over 300 women and children burned to death, right? So they have a big memorial over here. You know, and as a side note, when these things happened in society back then, you have to understand, like something like the Triangle Fire, you can go look at the accounts of the aftermath of that, right? Like a couple 100,000 people came here to Greenwood Cemetery to like be part of the funeral. Okay, like we can't even imagine what that would be like like today, because nobody goes to a funeral, right? Somebody dies, maybe a couple people, some people from the family go, but that's it, right? Back then, this place drew millions of people every year. If you were walking through this place back in the early 1900s or the 1920s, this place was packed. On the weekends, people would come here, picnics, they'd drink, party, they'd remember their loved ones. William the Butcher, right? When he died, or when he was murdered, he was shot in the back. When he died, over 200,000 people marched across the Brooklyn Bridge, which is just up the road, maybe 4 or 5 miles, all the way. Okay, he lived in the 5 Points was over by, is it in Lower Manhattan? Well, it was in Lower Manhattan, but it was in the Village. He lived over in the Village, which was pretty close to where his territory was that he ruled. And when he died, wow, I mean, it pretty much shut the city down. He was such a powerful figure, right? So the entire city pretty much came out. You know, I think it was over 300,000 people walked through his house over the course of a week just to see his body. Like 24 hours a day, people are coming in and out. And then a couple 100,000 people came here to Greenwood to like pay their respects to Bill, right? So terrific movie with oh boy, I know Leonardo DiCaprio is in it, and what the heck is his name? Bottom line is, look up Gangs of New York. You'll see what I'm talking about. Daniel Day-Lewis, fantastic movie. Other people buried here. One thing you're going to find here is a lot of people in the early 1900s and the late 1800s died via being thrown from horse and carriage, run over by horses, run over by the trains, the trolley cars that used to run over Manhattan. One of the modern day Pierpont is flying overhead, right? So incredible amount of history here. If you're ever in Brooklyn and you got just a few minutes, I mean, the museums, of course, here are spectacular, right? I mean, you go to these museums, you can see Warhols, you can see people are driving by. You could see Warhols. You could see whatever. But point is, we have some of the greatest museums here, right? You've got like every kind of great art you could imagine, ancient history, objects. We've got all the great locations in New York City, but nobody ever really comes here anymore, which is kind of sad, because this place is an incredible place to come see history. The architecture of the mausoleums and these tombstones are mostly carved by Italian immigrants, right? And they all came from the mountain part of Italy, right outside of Rome, and they were all classically trained masons, right? Like these are the descendants of people who built the Colosseum, right? And all this incredible artwork all over Italy, right? So it's like they got an opportunity. They're living in poverty over Italy to come here. And what did they do? They're in the tenements, they got no money, and then Henry Pierpont creates this cemetery, and bam, these people go to work. They're making all these incredible mausoleums and headstones, and they're absolute works of art, you know. So it's just a shame that so few people actually come visit this stuff. So this is Greenwood Cemetery. I hope you enjoyed this like quick little tour that I gave you. There's so much here to see. You could spend days and days and days trekking through here and never see anything. But enjoy.